Come for the finance and stay for the gold. So before I get into how China's rebuilding the entire financial system, I want to explain the bird's eye view of why the world is even looking at an alternative in the first place. And it really comes down to the idea of trust. The trust that countries used to have in dollars. For example, around 70% of all the global reserves were once stored in US dollars. In other words, countries held their wealth in US treasuries, bonds, right? Because they were considered to be the safest assets on earth. But then that started to change sometime in 2022 because that's when the United States froze about $300 billion worth of Russia's foreign reserves. Now, regardless of how you feel about that politically, what it showed to the rest of the world was, if your reserves are held in dollars, they're not really yours to begin with. They can be seized, they can be locked, and we can just turn it off with the click of a button. So countries were like, okay, I have a question. If you can do that to a nuclear power like Russia, what happens then if we disagree with you next, right? So that's why this change started to accelerate, because there was this loss of trust for paper assets. Central banks around the world, especially in what are called emerging markets, started to lower their exposure to US assets, and they started selling off their treasuries, and they started buying gold instead. Slowly at first, but then faster and faster. Check this out. This is fascinating. This is a chart of how much gold China has. For the longest time, you could see it didn't really move anywhere, kind of going sideways. They bought some, they sold some, they bought some, but as soon as President Trump started the tariff threats, the chart explodes, right? China starts publicly accumulating gold and locking it up in their vaults. It's the fastest pace of buying in modern history. It's being done on a scale that's publicly, this is important, publicly visible to the rest of the world. Because remember, China could easily be buying this stuff in private, but they're not. Because what that does is it telegraphs to all the other countries that, hey, look at all the gold we've got. We could now get off of US treasuries. That gives us the ability to get off of dollars. You can actually see this trend on a way bigger scale here in this chart. According to Luke Rahman, in just a couple of months, gold's share of reserves on the balance sheet will surpass US treasuries. Again, just to prove the point even more, on an even longer time horizon, you can see the same thing has been happening. The dollar's share of global reserves have been falling to the lowest levels in decades. By the way, officially, the People's Bank of China reports that they have about 2,300 tons of gold or so. But the real number is probably way higher. Places like Bloomberg Economics and JP Morgan and the World Gold Council estimate that China probably controls closer to 3,500 to 5,000 tons when you include the gold held by state banks and sovereign funds that aren't really publicly disclosed. Okay, so hopefully I've established the point that dollar ownership is going down, gold ownership is going up.